Welcome to Soul Elevation, where you can guide your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin, and I'm super excited for you to connect with this episode with the amazing Franco Romero. We go deep into fascinating topics like near-death experiences, spiritual evolution, the solar and astrological activity of the year, and how that is facilitating spiritual development. And we talk a lot about the mystical nature of reality and the myriad of clues that are waiting to be discovered as you evolve your consciousness. Franco is a near-death experiencer, and we spend a lot of time talking about the role of NDEs and their experience and what it does to our own consciousness as we connect with those stories. Franco Romero is a top 10 best-selling author, spiritual teacher, shamanic guide, and speaker. His first book, The Closet Spiritualist, was inspired by a near-death experience that left him clairvoyant. In 2010, Franco experienced a massive awakening where he was reintroduced to a collective consciousness known as Caleb, a guiding voice that's been with him since childhood. He's deeply passionate about helping others reclaim their truth as divine intelligence, the creators of the illusion or game we call reality. This passion has become his life's obsession, driven by the belief that it's time to move the human race forward in unimaginable ways. So we'll dive into the episode in just a minute, but first, be sure you check out karagoodwin.com, where you can get a free 10-minute meditation. If you want support for your meditation practice, I have a 21-day online program to help you develop your own practice. There's also Healing Hearth membership, where you can get live online assistance with your questions about meditation and life. You can also get a personalized recorded meditation/energy transmission to help you get through whatever challenges are showing up in your life. All of that and more on karagoodwin.com. And now enjoy this episode. So
Sure.
I used to just record and be like, hello, how are you? And then I was like, wait, it's cutting off the beginning.
Yeah, no, I get you. By the way, you are all set. You got the big massive mic and the ear set. You are like ready to go. Like, you know, you don't kid around, do you?
It's not my first time.
It's not your first rodeo. I get you. I
We're
get you.
almost up to 400 episodes, and
Wow.
I'm rebranding. So it's so funny because it's been like 6 years, and I've just kept going with the meditation conversation, even though it's not been about meditation for years and years. But so I'm going through this rebrand, and I'm like, which I'm enjoying, but it's like, yeah, let's just pivot. Like 400 episodes in, let's just change it all.
You know what? I get where you're coming from. I get where you're coming from. I mean, I'm in the process of rebranding. I'm also in the process of moving into a whole entirely new space. It's in a different space completely. I'm not
Oh,
as next year won't. I say this, but we'll see. I won't be as much involved in interviews as much as I'll
oh,
be involved in some special projects that I've been desiring to do for a long time. And so I've been rebranding my name. I've been rebranding everything.
wow.
Because I used to go by the Closet Spiritualist. That was the big thing. That
Right.
was my first book. And now it's just like I'm branding my name. And I'm like,
Okay.
but because people weren't really associating me with the Closet Spiritualist. I thought that was a cool way to brand my name, but it
Yeah.
wasn't. It's people were more connected with my name. So, but
Okay.
anyway, I do have a curiosity question because I don't know
Hmm.
much about you, but I don't know much
Yeah.
about usually the people that interview me. So,
Yeah.
um, I was a little bit intrigued by the name and what caused you to start your channel and
Mhm.
what are you doing now that you're rebranding? And you don't have to. You can give me the 25,000 foot view of it. You don't have to give me the
Yeah.
ground zero view of it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So it's going from the meditation conversation to soul elevation. And
Ooh, that is
yeah, you like
good.
that? Oh,
Yes,
thank you. Thank you.
yes.
So when I began, I had a partner in Sweden, and we had met through learning meditation, becoming meditation teachers. So it really was very focused on meditation, and like, we'd have little topics to do with how to meditate, how to fit it into modern living. And then she got really, really busy, single mom, lawyer, all the things of a single mom of a toddler, mind you.
Oof.
And she was like, something's got to give. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. So I kept going, but I changed it to an interview style. So it used to be just she and I literally having meditation conversations. And then
There you go.
when she dropped off, I started doing interviews, and it very quickly was just around like spiritual growth, energy work, the quantum space, really just like expanding consciousness.
Mm.
And so I would have to explain to guests and to people who would be looking for the podcast, I'm like, it's not really about meditation. I'm like, how long am I going to just do that? Like, put this caveat. It's called meditation conversation, but it's not really about meditation. It's really more around spiritual growth. And I'm like, I could just actually proclaim that in the title so that there's no confusion for guests who are coming on, or for people who are looking for a podcast on spiritual development, or if they're looking for a podcast about meditation, because this is no longer really that podcast. So
Yeah, yeah. Although I could see you, I could see you, I could see you branching out. I mean, I could see you using the meditation piece and still being able to do exactly what you were doing. But I do have to admit that soulful evolution or soul evolution,
soul elevation.
elevation, is a great name.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's actually very much in line with what we're all doing now. So
Right.
whether we know it or not. So I do feel like your branding is perfectly timed for what it's
Oh,
worth.
thank you. I appreciate that. And I love what you're saying in terms of what you're tuning into, where meditation's still part of it, because like I have a book coming out in March, and it's about spiritual awakening, but really the foundation kind of keeps coming back to and pointing to meditation is an amazing way to take these steps.
Yeah,
It's kind of that foundational piece of it. So it's
yeah.
definitely still a big part of how I work with people and of my own journey. But
So okay, one last question. I know that
yeah,
I'm the one that's being
yeah.
interviewed. So how does that sit? How does your energy, um, how is it received by the people in your community? I just have this image of Indiana, and it's like very conservative, and maybe it's not. I know that in the metro areas, it's not.
Mhm.
And either way, it doesn't really matter. But I just was wondering how has that translated?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I feel like I'm this chameleon who's, just like flowing
Me
with different.
too.
Yeah, I bet you do, because it's like I kind of know what sides of myself to show, but authenticity is really important to me.
Yeah,
So it's not like I'm going to pretend to be something that I'm not, but I know that there are levels, like the level of conversation I would have with you, I would not be able to have with a lot of the people that I just see on a day-to-day basis.
yeah.
But saying that, I have an incredible group here so like, are you familiar with the Power of Eight, Lynn McTaggart? She's
I've
done
heard
some.
of it, but I
Okay.
haven't really explored it.
So it's like group intention, and like letting one person be the focus, but you meet as a group. So Lori's in my Power of Eight, Lori Williams, who
Hmm.
connected us. But most of the people in my group are here, local, and we just met last night. This is why it's at the top of my head. But and we're talking about galactic stuff. We're talking about miracles. Lori was the focus of our intention last night, and it was all about like upgrading her DNA and her blueprint to the version 2. And so it's not like you would just sit down with a random stranger and get very far with those kinds of
You
topics,
don't?
right?
You don't do that? You don't go down Main Street, Carmel, and just kind of
Yeah,
pick any random person walking down the street and talk about the galactics?
I know. Isn't that? I know it's
So
shocking.
shocked. I'm so shocked.
But I would imagine, is it similar for you?
Yeah, it's funny because where I live is a suburb of the Twin Cities, and I can see my neighbor's house right across my window, and in that world, I'm just typical. I'm your typical anyway, but I'm just your typical dude that's just raking up his leaves and trying to get his house ready for Christmas, and and then I have to, and we have alley parties here because my house is at the end of the alley, and so it
Okay.
typically gets to be the sort of the focal point. And oh, there's no way I'd be talking about. Well, I take that back. Um, I did actually do a fair amount of talking about it, but this past alley party because most of my neighbors were drunk and wanted to know, and they wanted to know more about what I
And
was
the
doing.
guard comes down.
Yeah, the veil comes down a little bit, and they're trying to have a lively discussion or debate about the things that I'm saying, and I'm pretty firm in terms of what I know. And so but it's fun because it was really the first time they knew I had written a book. They know that I'm writing another book. They've known that I've had this other life, but it's like, well, I can explain it in the metaphysical terms. Their frequencies aren't there,
Yeah.
so it's like they remember, but then they forget,
Yeah.
and it's like they don't have. It's not like we're avoiding the conversation; is they literally forget then what I
Yeah.
do. So
Yeah.
so it's like easy. It's pretty easy. Yeah.
That's so fascinating.
It is. It is for some in so many different ways. It's so
It
fascinating.
it reminds me too of just that old adage. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but like, what do you do before enlightenment? Chop wood, carry water. What
Ah,
do you do
chop
after
wood, Gary
enlightenment?
Water.
Chop wood, carry water.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like I'll just be out there raking my leaves
Yeah,
because
I'm
it's
I'm
got to
raking
get
my
done.
leaves. Yep. I'm
Yep.
picking up my dog's poop when he does it inside the house and outside the house,
Yeah.
And
It's very humbling.
very yeah, no, there used to be a time, I'm no doubt, there used to be a time, so like now this is my full-time thing. It wasn't always my full-time thing, and I do have another side business that I've had for years, which is a nutrition business that I created with my own products. And I just would sit there and I would tell people 1 minute I'm talking about, oh my goodness, whatever you want to talk about in terms of the metaphysical space. And everybody's like all eyes, all ears on what I'm saying. And the next thing I know, I'll be in my other space, my nutrition space, and I'm dealing with the fact that my system is down or that somebody's complaining about this or that, and I'm going, I went from that to literally talking about the end of times, and I'm going,
Right.
it's
It's a
just like,
whole spectrum.
yeah, and I cover it like in a matter of minutes because that's how
Light
you got to
speed.
just shift into that energy. And
Yeah.
so that was back then. That has changed a lot. As I said, most of my time now is on this, and
Hmm.
so it's really nice. But still, I still get off of here, and I still
Chop
have
wood,
to do
carry water.
chop wood and carry water. you know, and
Yeah.
until further notice, so to speak. So,
Right. Yeah.
all right.
That's
So anyway,
fascinating.
I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your life and your background. So
Yeah,
thank
my
you.
pleasure. My pleasure. So I mean, we've been recording. Let me go ahead and welcome you since I haven't done that yet.
Okay.
So, welcome, Franco. Thank you so much for being here on the meditation conversation. I'm so excited to talk to you and learn about your journey and what you have to say about your perspective about what's coming and so forth. So, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I am going to put myself in a somewhat of a vulnerable position right away because I would like to know, is it Kara or Kara?
Oh,
Because
that's a great question. I go by Kara, but I don't even notice when people say Kara. So I'm
yeah,
really not sensitive to it, but
yeah,
thank you
same
for
way. Some
asking.
people would just accidentally call me Frank, but
I can't imagine
I
who
can't.
would do that.
Who would do such a thing, right?
Oh my
So,
goodness.
so thank you for having me, Kara. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. I've been looking forward to it for a while. We got in touch by Lori Williams, who discovered you from in my world. She discovered you and was like, "Oh my God, Kara, look at this! Like, watch these videos. They're incredible." And I was like, "Who is this guy?"
Who is this
So
guy?
yes, so such amazing information coming through, and just an incredible vibration that
Well,
you're
thank
you're
you.
emitting. So I would
Likewise.
love, oh, thank you so much. So let's just start by getting a little bit of an overview about how you became the closet spiritualist.
Ah, I love the way you frame that because
Thank you.
nobody asks that question in that way. That's I always enjoy when I get on an interview and somebody will frame a question like just the way you just did,
Oh, thank
and it's
you.
like, ah, that's refreshing. I love it. Um, so so I'll go back a little bit and maybe a lot to when, but I'll give it to you in Cliff Notes so that we have, because it could take it could take the whole
Yeah.
interview.
I know it goes back to like when you were very young, so
Yeah.
I can imagine.
So as I tell people when I talk about my near death experience, that my experience was a little bit unique, but I try to be careful about saying it that way and being mindful of the way that I say it because everybody's near death experience is unique. Okay.
True, yeah.
In regard to why I feel it's unique is because I didn't really know that I had had one, and I feel like over the time that I've been doing this now, I actually have met many people that are in that same boat where they have to go back into their own archives or what have you to remember an incident where they had a genuine near death experience. And with that being said, it's maybe not as unique as I'm going to make it sound, but I was 6 months old when I had it, and almost immediately I know that there are some people that will wonder, so where could this go if you're 6 months old? How do you even begin to have memories of that? And there's a whole series of conversations we can have about that, and we can explore that if you like. But I just started having these remembrances when I was about 15, and they came in the form of like just day-to-day visions. Like instead of daydreaming, I would have these visions, or and usually they were very typically they were like in the mornings when I was waking up, and I would just go into this deep, I wouldn't necessarily call it hypnotic trance, but I would just how you daydream, you drift off and you start having these visions, and or I would have them in my sleep. And what I was having were remembrances of the near death experience when I was a child. And what basically had happened when I was 6 months old was that I was brought in because I was having a hard time breathing. I was having what my mother thought was just a chest cold or something of that nature, and it turned out that I had a real bad case of bronchitis and pneumonia, or the combination of all that. And in those days, even to today, I mean, when you get something like that, it's pretty significant, and there's never a real clear clear path as to whether or not you can recover or not. But in those days, well, when it hit hard, and so my situation, my body started to shut down, and when that happened, almost within hours of being admitted to the hospital, I eventually, not myself, but my mother was told that I wasn't going to make it through the night. So that's sort of in the dream and visions. I went through the whole process of experiencing her experience, her journey through the process of accepting my near death. Okay, and so what was really interesting about that part of it, and I won't get into all the details because there's so much here to talk about, is that I really melded with her consciousness. And at the time, I didn't understand any of this. I just really could feel her anguish as if I were living it myself. And every thought that she had, every emotion that she was experiencing, I was experiencing it as though it was me. And so, like in the movies, you can imagine I was just kind of shadowing her throughout her experience. I was literally on her right side the whole time when she was hearing the news, talking to the doctors, having to go back and share the news with the family. And so I told her later on, because after a while of having these dreams and visions, I needed to talk to somebody about these, that I told her everything that she had gone through, like I said, every thought, every emotion. And she was absolutely floored by that because, for one thing, she hadn't told me about my near death experience. She was waiting for the time when I was a little bit older as an adult and she was going to share the story. She didn't feel like there was any rush to tell me.
Hmm.
And, and that alone was a big shock to her, that I knew all the details, every little bit. But what was really shocking to her was just that I knew all the details, the intimate
Hmm.
details of everything that she did, like when she went to the church after she got the news, And instead of praying for my recovery, she was thanking whomever, God, whatever. For her, she was a Catholic, very stout Catholic person. And so, of course, it was God in the way that most Catholics know God as. And she wasn't praying for my recovery. She wasn't even praying. She was meditating. There you go,
Mm.
meditation, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it was a meditation of gratitude and appreciation. And so I remember sitting there, and even at that age, well, first of all, just feeling into this dream or vision in a way that I had never had any dream or vision like this before. And then wondering why she wasn't asking for my recovery, and instead was so appreciative of the short period that she had had me in her life. So anyway, that was one aspect of the vision and dreams that I was having. The other aspect of the vision and dreams that I was having was that I found myself back in that same room. But this time, instead of, it's kind of like this Hollywood movie kind of a thing, where now I'm going to see the same event from a different perspective. What I saw was I saw her leaving the room, but I didn't go with her. Instead, I stayed in the room, and I really found myself bonding with the child in the room. And the initial times that I had those dreams and vision, I didn't know that that child was me. I had this sense that it was related in some way to me. Like maybe my first, probably if I had to guess, my first initial thought was maybe it was a sibling that I had not known had passed away or something. But it became pretty evident when I started having those versions of the visions and dreams that I was bonding to this child because I was connected to this child. I was the child. Then that vision and that dream led me to experience what would be the genuine or the true nature of a near death experience, which was to say that I felt myself integrating with its consciousness and allowing myself to feel how it was shutting down and preparing itself to move on. And I felt myself immediately as though I were in the child, lifting myself out of the body and finding myself up, literally, as most people would say, like up on the ceiling, kind of looking down at the entire situation. And that part of it didn't last very long because what happened next was that the room went dark for a moment. And the next thing I knew, I was, and this part, it took me years to try to figure out why, but I found myself in the desert, and I didn't understand why I was in a desert of all places. But the story there was that I was elevated. I was maybe 20 feet up or so, and people were looking at me. There weren't that many people, but the ones that were there, they were looking up at me. And what I realized was that they weren't really looking at me, they were looking through me. And when I realized that, I looked behind me and there was this huge orb, just this beautiful orb. And it looked like the sun, but at least 5 to 10 times bigger than what we would consider the sun to be like. And as I've said before, the only thing that came to my mind at that moment, sure, I was wondering why I was elevated up, on up on the dunes of some desert. Yeah, sure. I mean, that did come to my mind. But the only thing I could feel into was that I could look at this orb and it didn't hurt me. It didn't bother. I mean, my eyes were not affected by it at all. I could stare deeply into it, and I didn't have, how you would squint when you look at directly into the sun. It was nothing like that. And I kept asking myself, this is really odd. Why am I not squinting? Why is it not hurting me? Anyway, this process went on for just a little bit. And I looked down at these people. And occasionally, as I write in my book, I talk about how, at first I saw what appeared to be like this very, very old, decrepit man who had his hands out looking at me. And I was like wondering, why is he putting his hands out? And then I would see a child and same kind of situation, but now this time maybe 10 years old and doing the same thing, kind of begging for something. Well, what they were begging for wasn't anything to do with me. They were reaching out to the light behind me. And so the second time that I looked into the light, I had that experience of going into the light like most people talk about, and how profoundly beautiful it was, and deeply, deeply, the way that I have come up with different descriptions now of what that feels like when you actually integrate with the light. Back when I wrote the book, in the book, I only wrote it like 4 years ago, and actually it's kind of almost five now. But in the book, I talk about it as the million hugs, because I'm a big hugging person, and so I love when I hug and get hugged, and it's such a warm feeling.
Mhm.
And so I figured a million hugs, that should do it. That should be about right. And it turns out it was even much more than that, because the sensation of being integrated with this light was just it was hard to describe it, as most experiencers have a hard time experience talking about it or describing it. So I came up with a new way to describe it, and that is that, because this was consistent with my dream, and my vision was that when I went through the process of integrating with the light, every single cell in my body just blew up. It just blew up. And it wasn't just that it blew up, but it was the sensation of knowing myself to be every cell in my body, which is the part that is often a little bit harder to describe. Imagine you have 50 trillion cells in your body, roughly, give or take. And you were every one of those 50 trillion cells, every single one of them, feeling the exact same thing, the same awareness of itself, knowing itself to be you. And that was the one thing that back in the day, nobody was talking about any of this kind of stuff. Okay. You talk
Mhm.
about this stuff and you are seriously asking to get medicated and or institutionalized. And that actually did happen to one of my family members. And so there was no way that I was going to do this. I wasn't going to tell people about this. But later on, I wound up describing that experience as having 50 trillion orgasms,
Mhm.
because that was the closest thing to the ecstasy that one could feel when you're in that light. So anyway, fast forward, I spent a considerable amount of time in the light. I saw and described this a bit in my book about connecting with my soul family, and really understanding that my soul family, not only were they the three or four beings that actually came to greet me, they didn't have any physical features of any kind. They just had a silhouette, a lit silhouette, if you can imagine that. So a golden silhouette of who they were, and I knew who they were. I mean, I just knew instantaneously who they were, and the many, 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 many. I could say that for the next hour and still not come close to the lives that I had lived with them,
Mhm.
not just here, but really outside of here. Okay,
Mhm.
way more outside of here, and all the babillions. That's not a real word, so don't look it up. But babillions of different beings that were. Although I did hear somebody did say babillions once, and so I'm starting to wonder if it's not catching on as a new word. Okay,
It's the
so
first time I've heard it.
well, not anymore. It's gonna be in your
Yeah.
it's gonna be in your consciousness now. Okay.
Yes, right.
But in any event, I remembered looking far, far. I mean, I could go far into the light, and that one, like when you're in a stadium and you see that one person sitting all the way up in the corner of the stadium, and they don't really move because they're so far away. But so you sit there, at least I do, and I go, who's that person? What is their story? And I would say that that was the experience I had, because I could tell that the one light way out there in the middle of nowhere, I knew the story of that individual being, and they knew my story. And I knew it so intimately, like I had lived it. Anyway, that whole experience, I brought back a ton of information that I suppressed it forever. I suppressed it because, as I said, you didn't talk about those things. Okay, you'd be ostracized from your family and friends and whatnot. So I kept it to myself. There's so much about the details of that story, but I do talk about it now in the way that I explain things that I see and do, because now, as a result of that experience, I do a fair amount of channeling, and I that term can be often defined differently, but the way that I will tell you is that I just get a lot of information. I just have access to a lot of things, and whether you call that the Akashic records or whatever other term you want to use, I had to come to terms with that experience, and it took a long, long time. Even after I told my mom about it, She wanted me to tell the world. She was like, I all this time I thought your story, your near death story was and of course back then there was no such thing as near death. It was just you're almost dying kind of a thing.
Right.
She thought that that was the miraculous thing, because when she got back to the hospital, instead of me being dead, I was fully recovered from everything. My organs had come back online, and I literally, when I left the hospital the next morning,
Oh.
and so back then and even still today, that's all called a medical miracle. They just kind of chalk it up to that, and they don't really. Some people research it, most don't. And so she thought that was the story, and for the longest time in my life, I spent just marveling at that story. But the story itself had so many nuggets to it that would ultimately be revealed and would allow me to share in a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that I now talk about on these interviews and in my book, and my second book that's coming out soon. And and so I had to, though, suppress that for years. It was my desire to live a normal life. Ha ha. What the hell's a normal life these days, right?
Yeah.
But I was trying to conform to that, and it just tore me apart. I mean, most of I say probably the first half of my book, which is called The Closet Spiritualist, has to do with the trials and tribulations that I went through, mostly on my own, in order to get to a space where I could feel comfortable being free to share who I am and what I knew. So it was fitting that I would call it the coming out. I was talking to a neighbor, really literally, and I was telling them that I was writing my first book, and I didn't have a name for it yet, and one thing led to another, and she asked me something. I said, "Yeah, I suppose I'm coming out of my closet," and I was like, "There it is, the closet spiritualist." Because I literally had to come out of my closet, just like people come out of their closets for all sorts of things, usually mostly referring to like gender things or sexuality. But in this case, it was spirituality. It was not an easy process. And that was the biggest, I felt that that was the biggest reason why I wanted to write the book, was to share with people that, if one day I were to somehow pop out of nowhere and start talking these things, it was my desire that they understood that I didn't just appear on the scene, that it was a culmination of many, many, many decades of, well, I don't want to say many, many. I mean, I don't want to age myself that much, but I didn't. It just didn't happen overnight. So now
Yeah.
what I do is I share as much as I can all of the intimate details of the experience. I share what came out of it. I talk briefly about the fact that for the longest time I knew that I didn't really quite fit really well in this body, and I came to find out probably about 10, 15 years ago that I was, again, here this term wasn't used at the time, really, a walk-in, and I understood what that was all about. And it's not a real, despite what people would like to believe, it's not as important that you're in a walk-in as much as it is why you came back. And so you don't have to be a walk-in to have that story. It's just that it helped me to continuously ask the question, who am I? Why am I here? Why do I feel like I'm not really part of this body? And it all kind of started to make sense once I allowed myself to spiritually channel. Once I started to do that, the veil started to come off, and the rest is kind of history, because then I was able to speak in so many different ways about so many different things. And so that's how I got to here. That's how, I mean,
Oh,
that
wow.
was the best way I could describe it without getting into too much detail about any one specific thing.
Well, I love what you share and the way that you take these mystical things that are, it's so hard to find the language for, but you really do a great job of painting a picture that's impossible to paint, you know?
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for saying that.
yeah.
I pride myself on, and this has a lot to do with my own personal quest that I had in trying to figure out all of the minutia
Mhm.
that my life had, much less the minutia that was out there already. And when I say minutia, I don't mean it in a bad way, although it could come across that way. But just there's a lot there to unravel. And what I consider myself to be, and this is something that I really, really pride myself on, and I don't really talk about it as much, is that I pride myself on being a spiritual, or as I put it now these days, a consciousness hacker, or the hacker of the simulation of this reality. I really have spent an inordinate amount of time really delving into the streams of consciousness that help me to understand not only how to hack into the simulation that we're in, but to understand how to do it in a way that would enable the most benefit to come out of it, so that people can remember, myself included, but others can remember who they are. And so I really, it's almost like it is a game of Clue, a game of riddles, a mystery game. Um, and it's a virtual game, a digital reality game. It's all fascinating to me, how to decode and hack into the system, into the consciousness of this whole reality.
Right.
And that has been the biggest breakthroughs for me, is to be able to take all of this discussion. I mean, you and I were just briefly talking about sort of the way in which we have to flow through life in wearing different hats, depending on who you're talking to. And that's not all that different from the way that you have to look at this whole story about who we are and why we're here. This game, this thing we call life, is just packed full of different riddles and clues, all designed, if you choose to look at it this way, as a way to unravel the mystery of you. And if you do it that way, things start to make sense pretty fast. If you choose to just look at it from one perspective, it becomes awfully hard to find the answers that you're seeking, because you won't see the forest beyond the trees. You just wouldn't be able to do it. And even then, you will do it from the ground level, and you really have to do it from a much higher level to see the complexity and the simplicity of the whole process. It's really not. It's complicated because we've made it complicated, and that was by design. And it's not, as I talk about it in my book, and talk about it just in general. It's not as though, although people would like to do this, and I understand why, it's not, because it's part of the narrative of the game, of this life, to point out the sort of the bad guys, okay, in everything. It's easy to point at things out there and make that the reason why you're going through what you're going through, even in the spiritual process. When really what you have to, because that's surface level, that's what I call 3D level. You have to give yourself the grace to start at a different level. And the way that I've been talking about it for several years now, is that we have to accept the very strong probability. And I'm being even conservative here by saying that. A very, very strong probability that we are here as God, or as gods, remembering who we are in the game of forgetfulness. And so it's just amazing when you start to look at it from those perspectives. And this was all shown to me at one time or another through, again, either the experience of my near death, or just through the multitude of channeling that I've done. It's an extraordinarily fun, fascinating, sometimes complicated, confusing, and frustrating, but mostly fascinating puzzle game
Yeah.
to put together.
Well, you flowed right into where I was going to take the
Of
conversation next, which
course,
is,
of
of
course,
course, you
because we're
did.
like we're like integrating our minds together right now.
Right.
So
I know. But I love also looking at reality as a game or an illusion. And you've already laid some groundwork here, but if this is a new way for somebody to look at life and they're a little bit lost in terms of, like, how can you mean it's a game, it's an illusion, like life is hard, or we're just trying to get through life, or it's meaningless, we're, whatever it might be. Can you build on that a little bit? Like, and I'm with you. Like, I see it. I get blown away at the different ways that the same thing shows up,
Yeah.
for depending on how you, I mean, that's one of the ways that I see life, as just being this illusion or whatever it is. But it's like how sound frequency,
Yeah.
you pick up on frequency, you can hear it, or you can see it, it's color, it's light, or you can see it in geometry, and in angles and the Fibonacci sequence, and
Yeah.
all, and
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
same thing.
You're talking my language. Yep. You're talking my
Yeah.
language.
And it's just these little clues of like this intelligence,
Yeah.
that there's this design.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is going on here? Because it's all hidden. It's
It's
right there, but
Well, you
it's
see this,
hidden.
you're kind of like, in the way you're even expressing it, you're like a little kid. Your eyes are starting to bulge out,
Yeah.
and you're like a little kid, unraveling a big clue. You're just, your
Yeah.
hands got a little bit animated there, and
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, I guess you're kind of proving my point a little bit here, but okay.
Sorry, you give me your version. I just wanted
No, no.
to.
In fact, I'm gonna ride your wave, and I'm just gonna go with it. And
All right.
one of the things that has helped a lot more than any other aspect of spirituality and metaphysics is this whole phenomenon around the near death of experiences. This has helped a lot. And as you know, being involved in this, either in the capacity you're doing it right now or just in your personal life, um, people have really been drawn to that. I was talking to somebody else just recently in another interview that things come in waves, in terms of, I'm not saying that it doesn't, because everything's a pattern. So if you want to talk about Fibonacci sequences and stuff, everything is a pattern, and you can see the pattern that is evolving now in terms of what people are really sort of lending themselves to be enthralled by. And so the point that was being made there was that, well, maybe there'll always be a space for near death experiences. I mean, that area is going to always have intrigue, at least for the foreseeable future. But things come and go in terms of their sexiness or the hot topic of the month. And regardless of where you stand on that particular discussion, the near death experiences of people, and they're coming out of the woodwork now, okay, it's not only fascinating, but it's extraordinarily important for the average person. Let's call it the person who's just starting to remember a little bit. And I call it remembering more than awakening, even though in my first book, I talk about a chapter about the awakening, but I kind of frame it within the discussion of how people are talking about it. I call it remembering, because we're remembering who we are. We're not awake. We're not asleep. But that's for a whole other discussion. And the near death experiences have helped people to open up their mind to the possibility. I mean, if people are listening to hundreds, and literally hundreds, if not thousands, of near death experiences, trying to get a sort of to glean an answer to what exists on the other side. There is no doubt. I've seen it too much now to see that they're also being highly impacted by just the general stories that are coming back, or even the specific ones about what are the messages that these people are having. And so, interestingly enough, one of the general themes, not that everybody says it this way, or that even they say it at all, although when I've had discussions with experiencers, on, sort of one-on-one or what have you, they do come to the same conclusion, that this reality, this what we call life, is either, and it's not really an either or, it's an and, it's a play, a literal play of life. Okay, people literally coming into your consciousness, like actors coming in from stage right or stage left of a theater. It could be a game, and this one gets talked a lot about in simulation theory. but it doesn't quite capture the simplicity and funness of how one plays a game, like how you expressed, your as you started talking about Fibonacci sequences, which I know you probably break into those conversations at the grocery store. Um, okay, you got really excited. Okay, you got really excited, and you got excited as though you were like a little kid again. Okay, like you were on a scavenger hunt or trying to discover the great mystery of the world, kind of a thing. Okay, there's a reason why movies like Indiana Jones and National Treasures and I keep forgetting some of these other ones, but those types of movies, there's a reason why they fascinate us. Okay, because they touch an aspect of a potential reality that we believe up until now doesn't exist, but it does, and that's why it fascinates us. So so the stories that the near death experiences talk about is that it's a play, it's a game, it's a dream, it's an illusion. There's so many different ways of saying it.
It's a school, maybe?
It's a
Is that?
school. Thank you. It's
Mm-hmm.
a school. Um, and and for the most part, people listen and hear it, and they goes in one ear and one out the other, and they'll integrate it at some point, but they don't always get that piece. They for some reason that piece doesn't always seem to gel with people. They're still fascinated what happens on the other side. Okay, and yet these profound messages are coming back. And I will also tell you that in what I was shown was that the near death experience and the people who have them, the experiencers, their role in all of this is not only to tell the story about what's on the other side and some of the messages that they're bringing. They, like many of the messengers that are here now to talk about what is here and what's coming, um, are going to be activated, if you will, to remember even more of their experience when they were on the other side, so that they can bring back a deeper, richer message about this time. And you're seeing some of that too, because there's some now that are talking more about the similar things that I'm talking about. But in any event, to your question, how does that play out? It plays out in the subtleties of those kind of stories. So many people begin their trek, their quest, their odyssey into the stages of remembering of who they are by jumping into the YouTube world and listening to near death experiences and these random discussions of spirituality, the way in which that you do it, and they start to remember. It's the easiest way to describe it. They start to remember. They may not know it's a remembrance, but they start to remember. So it makes it a little bit easier. But I'm not saying that it's completely selling them on the idea that this could be an illusion, a game, a simulated game, because it also brings up a lot of concerns that, am I real? Am I like a digital character in this game? And it's a fair assumption to make, and it's what prevents people from really digging too deeply into conversations like this. Um, but the way that I describe it, and we can get into that part like a ton, okay, if you wanted to go there. And I could tell the way your eyes bulged that that would be an area that you would actually really enjoy talking about. But what I wanted to say was that the whole layout of this reality in the manner that it's a simulation is nicely being laid out for us in different ways so that people can get accustomed to the possibility that this could be a game. And the way that I also discuss it, because I have a very different opinion based on my experiences when I hit the near death and other channeling, that we aren't aspects of God, that we are God, and that the stories are similar, but not quite in the way that we interpret things. And the reason that I bring that up is because I tell people that as God, we have a certain disposition. And what I mean by that is we have qualities or characteristics that would be defined as in the worlds that we could talk about, the worlds of frequency. Okay. And those frequencies then get into really cool spaces of mysticism, which we often kind of woo woo it because or fear it because it tends to be in spaces of like black magic and all that stuff that people in cults and stuff, which rightfully there are some of that, because it's like with everything, there's always something that taints those things, so that we get afraid to look at them more carefully. But the reason I bring that up is because it's magical. It's magical. And when you get into the magic, you start to get into the worlds of the child frequencies. And so, as everybody talks about, like say the divine feminine, okay, frequencies, I can go into a lot about that in spaces that probably no one has talked about yet. But I also am responsible for sharing the story of the divine child, and how that frequency helps us to simplify things, and it helps us to play in the structure of believing that this could be a game, and that it is such a fun mystery game that's filled, like you've already pointed out, filled with so many clues and riddles to help you remember. And if you treat it that way, things will unravel so much easier. If you treat it that way, you treat it with a sense of joy and yes, love, but you treat it in a way that you don't approach it with a lot of fear. And you can't do that with you can't do any of this with fear being the premise for why you're doing it. So my responsibility is to show people that just as much as we are focused on, if people are even focused on the return of the divine feminine, or what does this mean relative to Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness or any of those consciousnesses, that there's an aspect of the child in us, and that aspect of the child is what is going to lead us through the minutia of all of this. And so I always put things very, and you've mentioned how when you listen to some of my other interviews, I have a way of being able to bring it all together, because I allow the child aspects of me to come through, and look at all of this as one big puzzle that has multiple layers to it. And when you can do that, it really becomes extraordinarily fun to play. I'm not going to say it isn't always roses. I mean, I'm not going to. It is rosy, okay, it's fun, but as with any good game, you're going to have your challenges to see if you can master those levels of the game. And that has been, to me, the biggest reason why so many people gravitate to the messages that I share, because I could make it as complicated as you like, but there's no reason for that. There was never a reason for that. I point out, and I'll make this one last point so you can get a question in. Um, I point out that in spiritual books, in ancient doctrine, and then now I don't study these things, but I'm willing to tell you that they're there. I'd bet my life on it. Okay, and that is talked about the child, the power of the child. And I do have a couple of references that people have in the over the years have told me about. And one of them is that in biblical terms, okay, there is a passage in the Bible about how the only way you can enter into the kingdom of heaven is if you do what?
Be like a child.
Be like a child.
Mm.
And if you look at it from that level, you only capture. If you look at it from the ground level, you go, oh, isn't that so sweet? Isn't it? We're all supposed to be like innocent children. Yeah, sure, there's a beautiful romantic feel to that, intimate feel to that. But if you only look at it from that level, again, this gets to what level at which you're looking at it. If you're just looking at it from the sort of the 3D level and with those filters, that's all you will get out of it. If you look at it from a higher level of consciousness that's playing a game, you start to look at it and dissect that question, that statement, because the kingdom of heaven in many other realms is viewed as the higher levels of consciousness. And if you look at the child, and you understand it is part of a trinity that makes up who we are as God, then you know that the clue here is that the only way, not the best way, not the flavor of the month, okay, the only way you're going to get into the higher levels of consciousness is if you strip away everything that you have been taught to believe about yourself, and you start treating it like a child would. And
Mm.
when you do that, my goodness, the doors open wide.
I
So,
love that. And I mean, just incidentally, I'm kind of just noting almost for myself when I listen to this later, but I got a sense of deja vu while you were talking about that just a few moments ago, which one is super fun because I have not, I used to experience deja vu as a child a lot. And I was just noticed, I was reflecting on that a couple of weeks ago. I was like, I never have deja vu anymore, which is weird because it's a consciousness thing, you know? So,
you're
so that
right.
was fun. And you and I have never met before. So I'm like, this is not like some sort of, oh, this is kind of where we went last time. It was like literally like,
No.
oh my God, this is deja vu. Yay, it's deja vu.
Yay.
Here we are.
Here we are. Yay. Yeah,
Yes.
it is amazing to have those kind of those moments like we're having here where something gets activated and it brings back something even more profound within your consciousness that you now want to kind of seep through and sort of savor with some level of deliciousness, because you just something happened. This is what I'm talking about, and it's hard to sometimes quantify it to people, but people will ask me, so what does it feel like? And I don't want to go off on this question because I know you have questions. So, but people ask me, what does it feel like to go into 4 and 5D? What are those things? And it's basically what's happening here is that you and I, yes, never met before. We had what, maybe 5-10 minutes before we got on to
Hmm.
just chit chat a little bit, get to know each other a little bit, and yet there is this integrated quality that we're going through right now. Like I literally am feeling into you and you're feeling into me, and in 5D that's what we would call the beginnings of oneness, um, where in a short period of time we could lose ourselves in a conversation, and if you didn't even, I'd say in a short period of time, we would start answering our own questions as if you were asking me and you didn't even need me to answer it anymore.
Which
Um,
you were doing, where
yeah,
I'm like, okay, well, here he goes. The next question was explain how you see reality as a game or illusion. And you started talking about it before I even got a chance to ask it.
yeah, exactly. And that is part of becoming one again. And there's a process to that is extraordinary. But these are the sort of the first hints, the first
Hmm.
clues. And for most of us would go, "Oh, that's cool. Did you how did and then we walk away from it. And
Yeah.
it's like, "No. No, 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 no. When those moments come, feel into them. Just enjoy them and look at them from a different perspective. Playfully look at them as this is something. This is something. This is something trying to tell me something. You don't have to beat it to death, but just feel into that and don't walk away from it, because the moment you walk away from it and poo-poo it, then that's what's called, you fall asleep again, or you stop remembering. Okay.
Mm. Yeah.
And I suspect we won't be doing that here today.
Yeah. Well, and for listeners, I personally have been noticing the resonance when Franco talks, that I feel in my heart. And so I want to bring that attention as you listen. First of all, if you're listening on an accelerated speed, you may want to go to a normal speed because I know sometimes with podcasts, or anything, we might just speed it up,
Oh, I'm
which
guilty of
has
that.
its,
I'm
yeah,
guilty
it
of
has
that.
its advantages,
Yeah.
absolutely. But if you haven't noticed any like resonance within your heart, I just invite you, you may want to slow it down to a normal speed and really just tune into your heart. Like literally drop your attention down into the center of your chest. And while Franco's talking, just notice if you feel any energetic activity there in the heart, because our heart is such a powerful gateway to higher levels of consciousness.
Yeah, you bet it is. You bet.
Right, right. And I love when you're talking about being like a child, and I want to float this with you because like you've been saying, there's so many different levels and layers of ways. Like these clues are everywhere
Mhm.
of this divine intelligence that's flowing through everything, and it's here for us to tune into and to notice.
Yeah.
And when you talk about being like a child, it makes me think of when we are children, we come in brand new, right? I mean, to a certain extent, but we're coming straight from source or from
Yes.
the higher
Let's.
realms.
Yes.
And then as we get experience, that we learn how to be human. We're conditioned. We take on the attitudes and beliefs of our family, of our schooling, of the media, of society, and so forth. But it's like it builds on top of us, and it shapes us, but it's kind of like adding and covering up that divinity. So it's kind of like finding that becoming like a child is really shedding. And you
Yes.
did allude to this. It's kind of like removing all of that conditioning, and it doesn't have to be like if you're going to clean a cluttered house, and that might take time. It can be like that, but it also can just be like in an instant. It doesn't have to be one of those things that it's going to take 4 hours to go through that room the way it would in the physical world. But that's one of the ways that I see that is coming back to the center, coming back to the core. And then you've got that Fibonacci part of it too, where you've got that center of the spiral, and it's kind of like all this 3D human experience of the physical reality. As it adds on, we can kind of spiral away from that center. So another way that and people listening, it might just be gobbledygook, like what I'm saying, and that's okay. So don't get too attached if it's like, what is she talking about? What is a
Where
Fibonacci
is she
sequence?
going?
Right. But it's kind of like we can kind of spiral out and get like further and further away from that center, away from that childlike quality and that innocence and purity that we are. And it's kind of finding that pathway back to the center and to our divinity and to our kind of authentic blueprint or
Yeah.
footprint of like how we came in.
Yeah.
But
Well, I guess we're done with this interview. Okay, talk to you later.
solved.
Solved. Everything. People, if you're listening to this, just rewind the last 5, 10 minutes and listen to it for the next, I don't know how many hours. And everything that you ever wanted to know is in that statement.
We
Okay.
did it.
We did it. Yay for
Yay.
us. The clue is over. We can all go home now. I'm going to
Oh
pack
my
up after this.
goodness.
Okay.
That's
So
so funny.
so there's a lot there that I want to point out, and one of the things that I always enjoy when I'm having these kind of discussions are some of the nuggets that, like I said, I'm always looking for nuggets. I'm always looking for another piece of how to say something maybe slightly differently. So I always tell people we're not here to learn anything because if you accept the premise that we are God or gods. And again, I'm going to see. I can go off in another little tangent here, but I feel like it's important for people who are listening that again there are references to let's call it the multiplicity of who we are. There are references, and the one again I go back to a biblical reference, but I'm not a Bible person, but there are references to this that even in the first book of the Bible, the Genesis book, the creation of humanity, it speaks. There's a verse. It's verse 26, I believe, and that's the only verse I know in the entire Bible. Okay, so if anybody wants to ask me about verses, I can probably respond to them, but I have to go look at the verse, okay, because I don't know what they are. All right. But in that verse, it speaks of the creation of humanity, and back in the day, it was the creation of man, but now it's been neutralized a lot, and that's good. The creation of humanity, and in there it talks about God as in the plural. Okay, so we and our, I believe, are the two descriptors in discussing God and describing God. We and ours, and nobody really. I've actually had discussions with priests and theologians, and there really isn't an answer that really satisfies me because it's very 3D of an answer, and but it's a standard answer, okay. But you can't avoid the fact that in the very first book of the very first in the very first chapter of that book, there is a description of God in the plural, okay, which lends into the story of how we are the creators of this thing we call God as a collectiveness, okay. But that being said, I went on a tangent can't even remember for the life of me what your question was. What was it again?
Well, we were talking about the innocence of the child and the centeredness and
Ah, okay, yeah, yeah.
spiraling out.
Okay, so now you got me. Okay, that's right. It wasn't a question; it was a statement that you made that we had solved the whole riddle right then and there. And and so what I was going to say is that we don't learn anything. If you use the word learn, I typically tell people use the word learn is to learn to remember, right? But in this case, I actually felt like you said something that was like so like spot on that I wanted to create a sort of an an exception to the rule kind of a thing, and that is that you said we learn to be human, because that would be as close of a description to what we are doing here that would allow for one to learn the process of being a human, because the other aspect of it, the learning part of remembering everything, why we're here, who we are, all that's already been established. Okay, that is who we are. Okay, and all we're trying to do is remember. But if there's any assimilation to this, it's the process of trying to understand what it's like to be human with this enormous awareness that we're starting to uncover. Okay, and oh, I had another point that I wanted to make about the near death experiences, but we'll see. We'll come back to that. But what you made, the comment you made about how we spend our early years evolving into what we know ourselves to be. What I tell people is that the evolution of of our soul, okay, is, and how did you put it? The elevation of our soul. I'll
Hmm.
use that. Okay, a little
Thank you.
plug-in elevation of the soul. Okay, the elevation of our soul begins at the moment of our conception. I also want to preface that the soul does not exist in the body, in the manner that we believe it does, until the moment that we are actually coming out of our mother's womb. The soul has no desire to be there. Um, it's nice, it's warm, it's cozy, I suppose, but the soul is experiencing so many other things during that time. It integrates with the body at the very last moment. But in that period, the body is an extraordinary intelligence, and it's a when I say intelligence, it's very. I use that word very intentional, okay, because it's collecting an enormous amount of data, the data that will enable the soul, once it completely integrates with the body, to jump into this world without freaking out, okay, because coming from where you were saying, the soul coming from source, okay, to all of a sudden being here is a huge shock to the system. And so it doesn't just happen in the years after birth, which is the developmental years, which there's truth to that. The vast majority of our evolution and our development actually occurs in the first 9 months inside the womb, as the body is collecting this data. Okay, I don't want to devalue it, but the body's it's a vessel. It's an avatar. Okay, it's a suit. Okay, a very extraordinarily expensive suit, because in this day and age that would be like the highest technology you can have. But in the worlds that we come from, we develop these suits to play in this game. It's a costume. Okay, and so the data that's collected in order to do this, it's really not that different like when you see in the movies how you're walking through this lab, and you have these funky uh, images of bodies, whether they're human or alien. They're just kind of sitting there going, kind of bubbling in the water, and you know what I'm talking about? Like,
Yes.
they're just forming, right? You just see them all over. It's some sci-fi movie, right? It's not that different, okay? That body is going through a development so it can be used in this world. And so in the first 9 months, it's doing that, and it develops an extraordinary amount awareness because of all the data that it's taking in from the mom, from the dad, from their lineages. And so by the time the first breath is even taken, the who you are, who you believe you are, that's the big thing. Who you believe you are is have already been established. And the next 7 years kind of add icing to the cake, and then whatever's left of that is what we do for the rest of our time here. And we used to believe that that rest of our time here was to develop that last 5 to 10% of our development, but it really now is to remember who we are out of this suit, and to remember that the social conditions that I describe in the book. Another way of saying it, and it's not really that harsh. It's going to sound harsh, but it really isn't meant to be. Is that we're brainwashed into believing who we are, and we spend our entire life believing that we have accepted this identification willingly when we didn't. We literally got it dumped into us. And so now we spend or are spending this time remembering that we are not anything like what we've been told to believe. Now, I'm not sure if I captured the full flavor of everything you said in that 5 minutes that you just went off. But ideally I captured some of the flavor of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's really incredible. I'd love to get your perspective on, with that as the backdrop. Well, if we think about the time that we're in now on the planet, we're recording this at the end of 2024. There's been a ton of like geomagnetic activity, and we had the massive solar eclipse in April, and we've had a lot of solar and geomagnetic activity.
Here you go. Okay, where are you going to take us now? Because
Well,
we
I
can go in a
wanted
million directions here.
I know. Well, how do you see that type of activity and kind of the bigger cosmic activity that humans are experiencing on the planet at this particular time? How does that feed into the game and the illusion and life and evolution, elevation, all of that?
Okay, so blah. How's that?
Just what's that called?
Oh,
Telepathically.
telepathic. Yeah, I'm just gonna just put it
Yeah,
in your
just
brain
beam
right
it.
now. Okay. So your question is very rich, and it gets to. Okay, hold that question. Okay,
Okay.
because I did want to say something about the experiencers that just I keep hearing. So as I'm talking to you, so for people get all sorts of different ideas or impressions about how one channels. And I guess the more stereotypical way that somebody would channel is that you quiet the room, you put a lot of candles around, I roll my eyes back, and then I start talking to you in a deeper voice or something like that. Or I could talk to you in a higher voice too, because I've done that too. But really, the way that one channels or can channel is the way that it is happening now. So what I mean by that is the way that I channel is that I'm constantly getting chatter. I mean, constantly. It's a barrage of chattering that goes on, and so I use my filters to try to figure out what is coming through and what's the sort of the prominent energy that is the message that is coming through. And so, in this case, I keep getting this reference to our discussion about the near-death experiencers. And what I wanted to make, the point that I wanted to make before I answer that question, that incredibly rich question that you just asked, was that we have, the way I describe this to people is that, we've spent our whole life dreaming of something miraculous happening in our world, on the outside part of our world, that would give us the cleanest, clearest view that something profound is happening. Now, you and I, just by virtue of this discussion, you and I know there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, a lot of stuff going on that most people, the overwhelming majority of people, are not tuned into. yet, and many of them may not ever be. Okay, um, but the point I wanted to make with regard to something extraordinary happening that could give people an indication that something huge is about to happen or is happening is simply in the experiences of these near deathers or experiencers. I often describe it as in this way, and again, this is more in the Judeo-Christian kind of view, but it's not. There are other religions that would subscribe to what I'm about to say. That we look to the sky, right? Literally look to the sky, and we wonder what will be coming out of the sky. Will it be angelic beings that come out of the sky, like in the way that ancient books would talk about, or would it be maybe not angelic, but maybe star people, galactic people, aliens, if you want to call them that will do that. But we constantly look to the sky in the desire to see if something is giving us a clue out there. And for some people, it is. I mean, you were just saying before we went on about the topic of the day yesterday in some discussion group that you had was about this particular topic. And there's a role that those particular light beings play in this game. And the reason I bring it up is because not only, and I feel that that's why people do look into the sky to see if a mothership would actually show up, and those days are coming. Um, but they're already happening in a different way, and we're not seeing them for what they are. And what I'm saying is that um, most of us have more of a traditional view of what we are, or maybe religious view of what we would love to see coming from the sky or appearing before us, and that is more in the realm of, say, an angel coming and sharing the good news of something that, or maybe the bad news of something that is about to happen. And I tell people, I say, if something like that were to happen, and you were presented with this angelic being that would share their wisdom and their light about your world, about you, about everything, you would listen. You would just drop everything and listen. Your whole life would just shatter in terms of what you thought was real and not real. And I keep telling people that that's already happening. It's happening by the droves. But we don't wear wings when we come back from a near-death experience. But we have been on the other side. And we are telling you these stories. And yeah, some of them are scary because there's a reason for the scary ones. But by and large, we're telling you that the time has come, and that this is now the time where people are going to remember who they are. And that good things will happen as a result of even the tumultuous things that are going on in the world. And most of us don't realize the messages that they're receiving them from people who have crossed over. They just don't have wings. And that's unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. But that's why I believe in their heart, as you were talking about going into your heart, in their heart, they know that the reason why they're listening to these stories isn't just to hear what might be on the other side, the salvation piece, if you want to call it that, but because somewhere along the way, they are hearing something about themselves, a story for them to remember exactly what they're doing here, why they're doing it, where they came from, what's happening now, what's going to happen later. So now that I said that, because they really wanted me to say that, so I decided to say it. Now they're happy, and I can move on. What was the question that you asked again?
So we were talking about like the solar flares, the
Yes.
eclipse, all of the planetary and cosmic activity.
Yes, 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 yes. Okay. Here again, the best way to describe this is that this is an extraordinarily fascinating game. Okay. And in this game, you have to look at it from the sort of the more of the sort of the fantasy dystopian utopian type of movies. I'm going to go with movies because movies in some ways help us to get a glimpse of what is possible or what is, okay? And the reason I'm referencing all this is because there's a really high level of what we would call mysticism in all of this. But again, remember we talked about this just briefly, and I want to shatter the impression that a lot of people have that this is just woo-woo stuff, or that this is stuff you don't play with. But astrology and the cosmos and all the things that come in with that, whether it's tarot card reading or whatever you want to talk about, all of that are again part of a narrative in the game that you can use to uncover the mysteries or clues that are being presented in front of you. I told you at the beginning, I'm not sure if it was either in the recorded part or not, that if we're only looking at things from one lens, you're going to miss a lot of the clues. And this is part of that part of the game where you're being presented with mystical beings or mystical events, okay, that are giving you signs of things that are happening. And so in this particular case, the astrological piece, now I will be one of the first to say, and I have said this in other interviews with astrologers, okay, this is not an area that I have up until very recently done a lot of soul searching, if you will, going deep into my consciousness to understand what the nature of it is. But I have gotten the message loud and clear, okay, that everything that is happening now is in one way, shape, or form not just a clue to what is happening to the consciousness of this planet, but it's actually creating extraordinary portals, stargates of or passageways of energy to flow into this planet, to give. And when I say energy, I'm meaning codes, activation codes or integration codes, things that allow, frequencies that allow us to remember as consciousness rises on the planet. These astrological events are massive. They are massive. And I know that there are others in this field that would describe them as this, but I am telling you, massive doesn't even begin to justify what these things do. The solar eclipse that was preceded by the lunar eclipse were two powerful portals that opened up next to each other. And what happened in terms of time, okay, and what happened is that those two portals then integrated with each other to create a seismic portal that would allow for energies to come in. What kind of energies? Well, in the case of the solar eclipse that I talked about earlier in the year, this was going to be a massive data dump of consciousness that would allow 4D energies, which are energies of awareness, okay, and 5D energies, which are activated energies of consciousness, oneness, and consciousness manifestation, to come into this realm unfiltered, untouched, and bam, right into this. Let's call it the heart and soul of each person's consciousness. Because for the solar eclipse in particular, and I love that it was like called the path of totality, okay, because it was totally going to hit you. It was going to totally dump all of these codes into your consciousness. And what did people do? They flocked. They got in cars. They traveled to the path of totality. Not everybody, but millions, tens of millions of people. And we've been around long enough. I've been around maybe a little bit longer, but we've been around long enough to see these kind of solar eclipses in the past or experience them. Never have I seen the enthusiasm, excitement for this particular solar eclipse. And they happen in different parts of the world as well at different times. We're just not aware of it. But but the ones that come through this part of the world, because of the energy that's in this area, because it is a very chaotic energy, okay, that this path has even more prominence, more impact. But tens of millions of people got in their car and stared right with glasses, okay, right at the opening of this incredible stargate. And in that moment, they got dumped they got dumped with so much information that they weren't even aware of. And because we're all part of the grid system of the consciousness of this planet, they became the receivers and the transmitters, unbeknownst to them, of all of this information that would be filtered throughout the grid system of the planet. And at some point in their own lives, they will be massively activated to remember. And so this coming year, for instance, and by the way, the lunar stuff that is happening, just forget about it. Okay. I mean, I can tell you, and I jokingly say this to people, when there's a supermoon, I wasn't like this before, but when there's a supermoon, if you want to find me, I'm the guy that's up on the rooftop howling at the moon. Okay. I am literally howling at the moon. Okay. But I wish it were just that, but I swear I'm like a werewolf in that I am literally I am literally wanting to tear my skin off because of the powerful impact that the supermoons have. They too open up an enormous amount of energy that comes through that supermoon into our grid system and activates the heck out of our grid system. And that creates a whole bunch of physical imbalances, or appears to have imbalances. Actually, they're not imbalances. They're actually righting the ship, okay? But the physical as well as the spiritual light being kind of energies, the light energies of our bodies, everything is getting hyper activated in order to prepare ourselves for the energies of 4 and 5D to come. But so the supermoon's massive, okay? But everything that happened this year, and what a year it has been for people who have really felt into the metaphysical space, the esoteric space of their beingness, unbelievable year. Unreal. Okay. What has happened on the surface, as I always tell people, that's always the last piece. Just like in a disease, right? When you're diseased with something physically, it's usually the physical ailment that's the last thing to show up because of all the stuff, the minutia, that real minutia that's inside of us. Well, the same thing here on the planet. The same thing is happening. Last year at this time, I was telling people, watch out for the end of 2024, because by the end of 2024, everything that has happened in 2024 internally with our grid systems and activating us to remember, all that stuff is ready to come online. And that stuff has to push out all of the negative things, the heavier energies, which you hear about all the time, but it's doing it now. It's pushing it out. Okay. And what is that energy? Well, we could again talk about the divine feminine stuff, which is extraordinarily important in this, but we probably won't have the time to talk about it as much. But anyway, that energy is being pushed out. And all of that is because of the astrological events that have been occurring. Those astrological events in the game open up stargates. And stargates are extraordinarily powerful energy streams that come directly from the highest levels of consciousness we often call source or oneness. But it's that powerful. And it's all setting itself up beautifully so that in 2025, and actually it starts at the end of this year with the winter solstice, in 2025, I call it the year of the reveal, because in that year, everything comes back online. And does that mean that everybody's going to start walking around speaking in tongues or talking about quantum physics or Fibonacci sequences? I mean, I know you would love that. Okay. But what I mean is that people are going to start to remember. They're going to start to have the subtle remembrances. Maybe some of them are going to be activated even much faster. They will go on hyperdrive. But whatever it is, people are going to start to remember who they are. And they're going to have those deep and very confusing conversations with themselves about, who am I? What's my nature? What's the nature of my existence? Things that we've always talked about. We've always had 3D. We tried to fit them in 3D context, but now those questions are going to be much deeper. They're going to be getting callings. And when they get callings, when you get a calling, you're going to get on a plane and you're going to travel around the world and you're going to do things that you didn't even know you could do, such as place crystals in various parts of the world. And you don't even understand why you got there, but you do understand the nature of why you put those crystals in there. And you're not even going to be able to say, a year ago, I didn't even know what the hell crystal was about, but they're going to do it. And they're not going to question it. And right now it's already happening with a small group of people. Okay. And these people are here intentionally to help set up the platform for the next wave that's happening now, but really into 2025 when people start to remember who they are. It is an extraordinarily powerful time. And the astrological events that occurred in 2024 and prior is what set it all up.
Wow. There's a lot there.
Yeah,
Oh my
I
goodness.
know.
I
I
know.
all of a sudden I got possessed by your body, and I was just rattling, rambling on.
No, you weren't rambling at all. That was incredible. And there are just so many different ways we could take it. I feel like we should probably wrap up, just not only for your time, but also because I know people have their limits of what they can take in.
Yeah, right.
So I think this is going to be one that people are going to want to listen to multiple times, and because there's just a lot in here. It's very, very rich, as you were using that word earlier.
Yeah,
So
well, and that's between you and me. I mean, your questions aren't really questions. They're this observation of things that just open up a plethora of ways in which to look at this. And again, it could be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. If you treat this through the perspective or the eyes of the child, things are much simpler. It's just one big scavenger hunt and mystery game. So
I love that perspective so much. That's just amazing. Well, thank you so much, Franco. I have just been enthralled and I've gotten so much from this conversation. Please come back anytime. I know you said you're winding down your interviews, but you have an open door. We can
thank
just
you.
chat anytime. I would
Okay,
absolutely love it.
I'll take you up on it. I'll take you up on it. I promise.
So, how can people find you, find your books, I know you're going through a rebranding. So, please tell people how they can connect with you.
Yeah, I have just recently changed to a new website, and so it's much easier, I suspect, because it's now just francoromero.com. And it really is. I set it up to highlight a lot of the things that I've been doing this year to give people access to all of this information easier. So I've set up a whole series of courses that people can playfully do, and also I create a community around it. And the book and information about that, and the things that I offer services in terms of teaching and doing one-on-one consults and stuff, all of that's there in francoromero.com. And if they just go through there, that's probably the easiest way. But I'll make sure to give you a couple of other handles and stuff so that people can access me that way as well.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much. Many blessings. I
Yay! We
loved
made it. We
this.
made it through.
Yes, we did. We did. Thank you for listening to this episode of Soul Elevation. Please take a moment to think about someone in your life who might be uplifted or have their curiosity sparked by this content, and send it to them. Let's keep sharing high frequency, empowering content to reinforce the highest potential for humanity. I also invite you to subscribe to this content. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you for the next episode of Soul Elevation.